Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Kegabine with the Garland County Library, and I'm here this evening with Arkansas Supreme Court Justice Rhonda K. Wood. Welcome, Rhonda.
Hi, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Justice Wood here has been serving as an Arkansas Justice since 2015 and has been awarded Arkansas Elected Official of the Year by the Arkansas Federation of Business and Professional Women, and is the host of a new podcast called Lady Justice, Women of the Court. And she's here this evening to touch on several topics, going to range from how our state Supreme Court operates, interactions between the judicial system and the public, what the experience of being a woman in the justice system is like, and how COVID has impacted our court system. So if anyone watching live has any questions for Justice Wood here, please ask them. And when she's done with the presentation she's going to open us with, I'll hop back in and read them off. So I'll go ahead and let you get started, Justice Wood, and talk to you here soon.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Paul, and thank you to the Garland County Library for giving me this opportunity. And thank you to everyone that's joining as well. And so I'm going to take just a little bit and tell you a little bit about the Arkansas Supreme Court. And then, as Paul said, we will open it up to questions and see if anyone has any questions. And I think Paul has some for me as well. So go through and talk to you a little bit about the Arkansas Supreme Court. If you're not familiar with the court structure, we have in Arkansas state district judges and district courts and local courts, and the numbers are there. From there, they appeal to circuit courts, which are what you think of as your trial courts, where you would hear sort of family law cases, your criminal, civil, probate cases, those sort of things. From there, we have the Arkansas Court of Appeals. You have 12 judges on the Arkansas Court of Appeals. And then from there, you have the Arkansas Supreme Court, and there are 7 justices that serve, and I'm honored to be able to serve as one of the 7 justices. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about how that works. The Arkansas Supreme Court, if you're wondering what types of cases we hear, so we have anything that if someone is not satisfied with the decision from the trial court, which are your circuit courts, they will appeal, and it can go to the Arkansas Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court. Typically, they go to the Court of Appeals. The Arkansas Supreme Court has the discretion, and we can choose to take any case from the Court of Appeals. We can take it when it's initially filed and before they make the decision, or after they've decided the case, parties can ask us to sort of review their decision and take it after the fact, and we do that as well. But there are some cases that come directly to our court from the trial court, and those are cases that involve the interpretation of the Arkansas Constitution. Any case where a criminal and a defendant has been sentenced to life in prison or the death penalty will come directly to the Supreme Court. Most of your interlocutory appeals, which is an appeal in the middle of a case because there's some issue that needs resolved in the middle, would come to the Arkansas Supreme Court. Election matters. So all of the cases, we just had a slew of them this fall, when you saw challenges to whether someone was qualified and should be sitting as a candidate, or the questions after the fact about the voter challenges, in addition to ballot challenges. All those matters come to your Supreme Court. And then extraordinary writs are writs for habeas corpus, all kinds of writs that ask us to sort of step in the middle of a proceeding and grant some extraordinary relief. We also take any case that involves the discipline of attorneys and judges. So that gives you a little bit about what types of cases we hear. The typical appeal process is up here. And so typically the parties have to file a notice of appeal within 30 days. From there, then the court reporter and the circuit clerk prepare the record. That takes 90 days to up to 7 months to get from the trial court to our court. So it's a lengthy process. Once the record is up and we have everything in front of us, then the parties, the counsel and attorneys have an opportunity to file what we call briefs. And those are about 30 pages. The first party then has 40 days to file theirs. The next has 30 days to respond, then 15 days for a reply. Then it's submitted to our court, and it's usually submitted within about 30 days. and then we conference, we decide the case, and we hand down a written opinion usually about 14 days after that. So it is a lengthy process, but we have always been ranked in about the top 5 of all states for being the fastest and most sort of efficient court in the country. Your Supreme Court has been. To give you an account of sort of the caseload, the Arkansas Supreme Court in 2019 had about 220 new cases filed. We decided 250 cases. To give you a sort of ballpark to how that sort of compares, the U.S. Supreme Court decided roughly 40 cases. So when you look at that comparison, 2 years ago, I did an analysis and we were the 11th busiest Supreme Court in the country, which when you look at that compared to our population and the number of cases, would be highly unusual that Arkansas should be the 11th highest, busiest when you compare that to California and New York Supreme Courts. We're very, very busy. The makeup of our cases is pretty equally divided between civil and criminal, with a little bit more civil. But some of those civil cases are actually inmate cases, and a lot of those challenges. Very few juvenile cases, because those would go directly to the Court of Appeals, and it would just be our choice if we took those. And then you can see sort of those writs and those other types of cases that we hear. Extraordinary writs are a lot of what the election challenges are. To compare how busy we are in an election year versus a non-election year, in 2019, in the whole of the year, we had 42 extraordinary writs filed. In 2020, which was an election year, between July and November alone, we had 73 filed. And when I say filed, that means those come in at any time, day or night. They're filed, at 6 p.m., at 11 p.m., at 8 in the morning, sometimes at 4 a.m. We have 24-hour online filing. And they're extraordinary writs, which means the court acts extraordinarily. And so we immediately bring it up for consideration at the court. So we're sort of always on call for those sort of things, and that we step in and handle them depending on the priority. The other thing is ballot challenges and initiated ballots that we handle. For example, in 2018, these were the challenges that we had. We had 6 challenges. These were what you sort of see, the referendums and the petitions where people get signatures to get a constitutional amendment or a law change on the ballot. We had 6 challenges before us that came to the court on whether something should really be on the ballot or not. In 18, every year we have quite a few of those. We were found that most of them were not valid and had not met the constitutional requirements to remain on the ballot. We did retain the casino, the minimum wage, and the voter ID did stay on the ballot. And then you, the voters, did approve all 3 of those. And so those became either constitutional amendments or law. The timeline, sometimes you guys have probably noticed that you're voting, that a lot of times there is a petition by the people to change either term limits or minimum wage or something like that. And that sometimes it seems like something's on the ballot, you think, and then you hear that the Arkansas Supreme Court removed it from the ballot sort of the day before or right before voting starts in November. And a lot of times there's some criticism that the court waited too long. And so this timeline really shows that it's sort of out of our hands and we move really quickly. So this was the term limit challenge in 2018. And the action actually didn't get filed to remove it from the ballot until September 5th. Because of the process of how it gets submitted and we have to have a mini trial, it did not get submitted to the court. Then all of that took place in a month. So we got it October 11th. We got the opinion down in 8 days, which was October 19th. And then early voting started October 22nd, I believe. And so these things come into the court very last minute, and we have to sort of be able to stop everything and do them. The pages and what we read is sort of astronomical. in the term limit record, the record that came up to our court was 17,386 pages long. And it was unfortunately not searchable electronically. It was scanned in, and if those of you familiar with filing anything electronically, if it's copied and scanned in, then you can't search it electronically. And so we had to comb through those, 17,000 pages of records to see if each signature, if it was valid and met the constitutional requirements. So that tells you a little bit about some of the work we do at the court during election season. We also have a large administrative role. So we regulate the practice of law. That includes everything about professional conduct and the licensing of attorneys. We license and regulate court reporters, and so everything in that regard. We also supervise the judiciary, so the judicial conduct, how they operate, whether they have specialty courts, their administrative plans, everything comes through the Supreme Court. We also oversee through Amendment 80 all of the rules. So the rules of civil procedure, appellate procedure, criminal rules, and the model jury instructions, all of that is done through the Arkansas Supreme Court. We also publish the child support guidelines. A lot of people don't realize that it's the Arkansas Supreme Court that sets the child support for the state. We recently, last year, made a major change in child support, and we shifted to a joint sort of shared income approach. It used to be they only took the non-custodial parents' income and said you paid sort of, 20% or whatever of that. And instead, we completely changed the whole process. And so it now takes both people's income into account and then goes off of that. So that was a major change that the Supreme Court did in 2019. And that was after really 6 years of work and research and actuarial studies to determine that. We also do security and preparedness statewide and train all of the court bailiffs. We do the automation, so all of the court filings, all of the court records, all of that is run through the Arkansas Supreme Court, as well as the unauthorized practice of law. So emergency preparedness, it was up to the Supreme Court to prepare the courts from district courts, circuit courts, everyone when COVID hit. So one of the things we did is we had to sort of come up with the money and figure out how in our budgets and apply for grants to get PPE to the courts so they could keep operating. Our court was able to distribute about over 700,000 masks, over 1 million gloves, 15,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, and the thermometers for the courts to do that, because individual courts, of course, didn't have the budgets or the means to do those sort of things. We also have 2 commissions at the Supreme Court. So we have an Access to Justice Commission that focuses on how to provide access to legal counsel in the courts for individuals that can't afford attorneys and need legal aid. And then we have the Commission on Children, Youth, and Families, which I have chaired since 2014, that looks at how to improve the court system for any court families that are court involved, whether that's juvenile justice or child welfare cases. And so that's a big part of our workload. So you can tell that there's a lot that we do at the court. The other interesting thing when you talk about COVID-19 is when you sort of see and hear the governor made sort of decisions about the state and sort of different mandates and protocols for interactions and limited group size. Anything the governor did not impact the judiciary, because we are our own branch of government. And so the executive branch can't tell the judicial branch what its limits are. So as the Supreme Court, once COVID hit in March, we had to come up with the protocols. And so the Supreme Court has done numerous orders sort of setting the parameters of when courts could operate and when they couldn't and what the standards are. And so that is available on our website, the most recent one at www.arcourts.gov. Currently, there are no jury trials in the state per our Supreme Court. And then we have social distancing and masks required as well. And And then also big part, and that's why I'm doing this today, is all of the justices on the Supreme Court believe that we need to do civic outreach, and that's part of our role as a justice on the Supreme Court. We do appeals on wheels. We have not been able to do that since COVID broke out, but typically once every semester, the court actually travels to a city and we do oral arguments live in either a college or a school gymnasium so they can see the court in action. And then we spend a lot of times over like usually a 2-day period interacting with students in their classrooms and community leaders about the courts. We do a law day in May, an art contest and an essay contest at the court, and you can always find information on our website about that. We do a judicial outreach week, and that is the first week of March. This year we are making ourselves available, and we are Zooming in the justices individually with different teachers and classrooms throughout the state of Arkansas. We have oral arguments about every other Thursday, and we live stream those on YouTube and make those available on our website. So they're saved and you can always go in and watch an oral argument. We have social media. So the Supreme Court has a Facebook page, and we are also on Twitter at arcourts, and you can follow us and see our opinions are always out there. And then we have a Courts and Community podcast that gives you some information about the courts. And there's also a really neat virtual tour of the Justice Building that we put out during COVID, since people can't come to the building and see our building right now. And then, as Paul mentioned, I was privileged enough to start Lady Justice Women of the Court with 3 of my dear friends who are Supreme Court justices in other states. So I am friends with Bridget McCormick, who is Chief Justice in the Michigan Supreme Court, and then Justice Eva Guzman on the Texas Supreme Court, and Beth Walker, who is a justice on the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals. And we started getting together, and the first project was actually my granddaughter Blakely, who lives in Garland County, did an interview with us on YouTube. And from there, we kept working on projects during COVID, and we started a podcast this fall. And so we talk about state Supreme Courts, the differences between our states, the difference between state and federal courts. And we spent a lot of time talking about what it was like being a woman justice and a woman lawyer, and running for office as a female. And so that is available on Apple and Spotify and Podbeam. And you can find it also directly on at ladyjusticepod.com. if you're interested in that. And then please check out our website. I said it before, our court is at arcourts.gov. Our annual reports are every year that have the statistics for all of our courts, all the virtual tours, the podcasts are there. You can access case records there. You can see and find out who all the judges are in your area, in your counties, and contact information for all the court's various boards and commissions, and search for licensed attorneys, and find out different information. So please do check out the court website as well. But that's really my overview. And so with that, I am interested to see if anyone has any questions or comments.
Well, I have a comment. That was a great PowerPoint. Very informative. And if the audience is going to be shy and not want to break the ice on the questions, we have plenty of things to talk about. So first of all, would you go into a little more detail on what inspired you to get involved in the judicial career?
Well, and I actually, I didn't really, I say that I'm sort of the accidental Supreme Court justice. It was not a plan. So I was a law professor. So I worked in the legal field, and then I was teaching an assistant dean at the Bowen Law School. And a judge retired early in my district, and she primarily did juvenile court. And the governor was making an appointment for a 2-year appointment. And I just, a lot of people had reached out and asked me, and the governor asked if I was interested. And so I decided to pursue it, and thought it was really a temporary 2-year position. And then I fell in love with it. And so ran for office and kept running for office. But it was never part of a plan. Though my parents will tell me that apparently at some elementary grade school, what do you want to be when you grow up? There's something out there when I was like in school that said I want to be a judge. So maybe subconsciously, it was always there.
So what are the qualifications to become a justice?
So you have to have been licensed in the state of Arkansas for the immediate 8 years prior to running. So you have to have, obviously college, law school, and then 8 years prior to running for office.
Is there anything else to the typical roadmap of becoming one?
No, I mean, we all have varied background. 4 of us on the court right now served on the Court of, I'm trying to think now. Yeah, 4 of us served on the Court of Appeals. So 4 of us came from that. 5 of us have been circuit judges, so served on the trial court. So it's typical for someone to probably have served in a different area of the courts before becoming, but not necessarily. I don't think there's one sort of magic path. I think you just have to have the desire and hopefully have served your community, that your community believes that you have the work ethic and hopefully the legal mind that you could serve and do justice.
What would you consider the essential traits of a good judge or justice?
Patience, diligence, and the ability to be thoughtful and sort of deliberate and not sort of rush to judgment. And the ability to set your sort of personal views aside. That's a really hard trait and a hard ability to do, is to not look at it. I describe it as we look at every case, you look at things through lenses, and you have to be really careful that you're not, I'm not looking at it as the Rhonda Wood lens, I can only look at it as a justice lens. So you have to really, make sure that judges and justices have those traits.
Right. And that kind of goes into my next question. Supreme Court judges, at least publicly, are designed to remain nonpartisan. And I mean, obviously that can be a struggle. How would you say most judges handle that struggle?
It's really hard because I think, so frankly, it's hard to get elected to statewide office if no one has ever known who you are, right? I mean, that's just to be frank. And so most of us have some sort of past or some sort of connection. And so it's really hard if you've had a life and then to suddenly become nonpartisan. I think people want to tie you into that. And so you have to sort of leave that role behind. And it's not an easy thing. And you have to learn not to, comment on things and do that. And people, they don't want their judges to be partisan, but yet they do. They want them to be partisan when it suits them. And so you have to sort of be very cautious of that.
Right. When a justice is appointed by a Democrat or a Republican, the constituents who are part of the opposing party are going to assume that the judge leans that way.
Yes.
Do you think there's a better system of how to nominate judges where they can more easily separate themselves from the party that nominated them?
No. Well, in Arkansas, we only we're only appointed if there's a vacancy, for a sudden sort of illness, death, that sort of thing. And then you can't run for that position. So for instance, I was sort of a rarity that I was appointed, but then I couldn't run for that same position. I had to run somewhere else. So I couldn't run for that. So there's a little bit of sort of distancing in that, but I will tell you that that's true. And so, I mean, I was appointed by Governor Huckabee way back in the day. And so the minute then I ran, it was, she was appointed by Governor Huckabee, and so that label was going to stay with me no matter what. And it was like, well, I hope that he didn't pick, I hope he picked me because I was the most qualified, that he wasn't picking, anything to do with partisan politics. But, trying to meet the public and get them to understand that and hopefully believe in that is another thing. But I know in Texas, all of their Supreme Court justices run by party and they're partisan. I think nonpartisan is better, but it is still hard to navigate.
Right. That's something we've seen on a nationwide scale in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So how's your typical work week like? What does it consist of?
So we conference cases and do oral arguments on Thursday. And then we vote on motions. We have a lot of motions on Wednesday. So typically it's Monday and Tuesday are heavily reading and writing. Wednesday and Thursday are voting and conferencing with our colleagues and oral arguments. And then Friday is usually sort of tweaking opinions and finalizing opinions so that we can get them out to our colleagues first thing Monday morning. So it's, a lot of what we do is cerebral, a lot of reading and writing and research. But Wednesdays and Thursdays are kind of hectic days at the court and our busiest days.
What are the main ways that a state Supreme Court differs from the U.S. Supreme Court?
So the U.S. Supreme Court is blessed in some ways that they only take the cases they want. And so that's one of the reasons that they only, had 40 opinions, I think, last year. So they are completely discretionary court. Arkansas has one of the largest mandatory caseloads. And so that's one of the biggest differences between the two of us. Other than that, a lot of the way we operate is very similar. Obviously, they're appointed. We're elected. They get lifetime appointments. That's, we think that's kind of nice when we run every 8 years. But, they have, their most junior justice on their court is sort of given special assignments. And we kind of tease our junior justice, whoever the newest one is, is the person that gets the water and gets the doors. And the collegial nature, I think that's pretty similar between the courts.
How does the court decide who writes the majority opinion?
So that is one area that we're different from the U.S. Supreme Court. So the U.S. Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, once they vote and whoever's in the majority, then the Chief Justice actually chooses who writes the majority opinion. At our Supreme Court, our cases are all randomly assigned by computer. So the computer will randomly draw two numbers, and we're all sort of numbers based on seniority. So I'm 4. I'm fourth in seniority on the court. And so it'll draw like a 4 and a 2. And that means that if I'm in the majority, I write the opinion for the court, number 4 does. If I'm not, then number 2 writes it. And then we go from there based on seniority. So it'll go 4, 2, 1, 3, back around. But it's all completely random and computerized. And I think that it makes for a good, that whoever writes it, that there was no sort of selection or predetermination in it. And so it's completely random. Though sometimes we feel like somebody's been hit with really hard cases a lot, and then someone gets really easy cases, and we sort of start questioning the computer.
What are some of the common myths and misconceptions people have about the justice system or judicial system and the Supreme Court in particular?
So I think one misperception is that we sway the outcome. And I think particularly in the ballot cases that I talked about, there are so many times that I have voted or even written an opinion to say something stays on the ballot, and then I go in the ballot booth and vote against it. And so I think that, people have the impression that, I'll hear that I wrote an opinion and it's like, Justice Wood is against this, or Justice Wood's for this. And it has nothing to do with what I personally feel. And, I have 2 law clerks, attorneys that work in my office, and we sort of chuckle because they know how opposite I am, but we just have to follow the law. And so I think that people misperceive that. I think they don't understand that every decision in front of us is a hard decision, or it wouldn't be in front of the Supreme Court. And so sometimes cases they feel like they know the facts that are out there in the public, and they think that it seems so black and white, and like, it seems so obvious. Why did the court, not do that? But if it was obvious, it wouldn't be in front of the Arkansas Supreme Court. And so cases are very, very difficult. The other thing I'll say in defense of trial judges is a lot of times we reverse a trial court, and I see that the trial judge gets criticized as they were wrong, or they, committed the error. But our reversals are really just part of the process. Sometimes they're reversed, and it's not because they were wrong. It's because the law had been misinterpreted previously. Or sometimes it could be that one of the attorneys made a mistake, and that's what required the reversal, not the judge. So I think that sometimes people blame the trial judge when reversals happen unfairly.
I'm sure you talk about this a lot in your podcast, but in your experience, how are the expectations from colleagues and the public different for a woman in the court system?
So I think one is our shoes are different. I always say, especially campaigning, it's not fair that we're campaigning in heels as opposed to men have more comfortable shoes. I think that sometimes behavior that a male can get away with, a female can't, and we get criticized differently. I'll tell you that we get different questions sometimes. We went to one of those appeals on wheels where we had questions from a big group of people, and the male justices were getting questions about like where they went to school and college and what their degrees were. And then we got a question that was, do we have a hairstylist that travels with us? And those kind of questions. And we were sort of just taken aback by that, that was still sort of going on. So I think it's different. For me, I campaigned, I had to do it with 4 children. And I think the expectations were different. I think that people, gave me a little bit of a hard time sometimes about where my children were and, who was, taking care of them. That I don't think they had that with the male candidate. So I think things, I think times have changed though. I'm in my 15th year judging, so I think a lot of that's changed since I first ran.
Is sharing those experiences a large part of what inspired you to start this podcast?
It is. And one of the things is all of us are on social media and Twitter, my fellow justices and I, that are female justices, and we were constantly having women lawyers reach out to us and say, hey, could you visit with us about what it was like to run and what it's like to be a female justice and what your experiences were as a female lawyer. And we were getting those requests all the time, and even law professors asking us to come talk to their class. And so we just sort of felt like there was a need, and that they were asking us individually that we would collectively do something that could be available. And I know just this week we heard from another law professor that said they're requiring their class listen to the podcast as part of their class. So that's pretty neat.
Do you know off the top of your head how many women have served on the Arkansas Supreme Court?
So there are, I think. I think there are, let's see. When I took the court, it was the first time the Arkansas Supreme Court became a majority female. And so there were 4 of us. Before that, the only other elected female justice was Justice Annabelle Ember Tuck. So that would have been 4 or 5. And then Justice Barbara Webb just got elected. So there have been 6 females elected to the Arkansas Supreme Court. There have been a couple others appointed as special justices, but only 6 elected in Arkansas.
Have there ever been any women of color on the Arkansas Supreme Court?
There, I believe that there was a special, but not elected.
So are you pleased with the success that your podcast has received so far?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we're friends, so we joke that we would probably do it because even if nobody was listening, that it's really a sort of mental health break for us to be able to get together and talk about things and have colleagues in different state that we can sort of talk about issues and discuss it. But the feedback that we're hearing, it's really, we're trying to do it for civic and public education, but we're hearing a lot from young women lawyers that are saying this is helping them and inspiring them. And so maybe we're getting, future generation of women to consider running for judge and justices. And so that is just heartwarming.
What are the limitations on what judges and justices can talk about when doing things like podcast or this interview?
So we have to be kind of careful. And we can't talk about, of course, any current cases in front of us, and we can't talk about any issue that is likely to come before us. Then we would predetermine that issue. And so those are sort of the parameters that we're prohibited from. And then Arkansas, because we're nonpartisan, we're prohibited from endorsing candidates for office or affiliating and joining a political party.
Who would you say are your big influences or role models in the justice system?
Previously, my two sort of favorite Supreme Court justices were Justices Scalia and Justice Elena Kagan. They, I always think, were the best writers on the court. I am sort of love writing and the elements of writing behind what we do. We can make the decisions all day long, but if the public can't understand the decisions we make because we haven't articulated that well in our written opinion, we haven't done our job. And so I care about that. And so those two are two that I really, they're just great. Both of them were law professors. So I think maybe that's why I like that, because I was a law professor as well. And then I think that maybe law professors are just better writers. So a little bit of bias there. But and then I love the Scalia-Ginsburg relationship. So those are some of my favorites and role models.
So speaking of writing, have you written any decisions that you personally wish had a different result?
All the time. Not that I would necessarily identify them, but so quite frequently that happens. And like I said, I have two attorneys that work for me, and we sort of mini conference with the cases before a conference with the court. And it's funny because we'll come in and I'll just be like, I cannot believe that, this is the result and this is what the law says. And, it's like I sort of know in my head that there's no way that's what the legislature really meant when they were, drafting it, but that's what the language says. And so that's what we have to follow and do. And there's times where the law it's been pretty awful. And, hopefully we cue them in, and a lot of times they go back and, change it and do that. So, there's a question on here about my favorite people's court judge. So I definitely have to say Judge Wapner to that question that I just saw.
What about Judge Brown or Judge Judy?
So I can't really favor either of them, because as a trial judge, if I had a nickel for every time I had to say, I'm not Judge Judy, like this is not how you act in court. Because I will say that people come to trial courts and think that it's like court TV and they can act, yell out and act inappropriately. And that's not how you act in court. So I'm not a real fan about them, because they have tended to let people sort of misrepresent what the judiciary is and that. But I grew up in Judge Wapner's days, so I'm a little bit older. So I was a fan.
What happens if a judge makes a ruling that they did have control over in a case that she or he later regrets?
So I think that there are times where, so we're not perfect. We can get it wrong. And there are times where our court, there's been a decision by our court that it may be 4 years later that the issue comes back and the court says, time reflection, reevaluation, that, decision interpretation of the law, it was incorrect. And we're going to rectify it. And if we can't be willing to do that, we really shouldn't be in this business, so we can't be afraid, to say that and admit that.
If you had a magic gavel and could change anything about the current court system, what would it be?
Probably that there was just an influx of money. Money is, one of the main problems with a lot of the court system. So it's preventing access to courts. It's preventing timeliness in resolving courts. With COVID, we're going to have a big backlog with all the civil and criminal jury trials. Our Supreme Court's going to try to figure out a way to do that, but we're going to need money to make that happen. The courts are just a lot, in part, function on fines and fees. And that, really is inappropriate if you think about it. A judge shouldn't sort of have a motivation to keep, imposing fines and fees because it pays the bills at the courthouse. Probably if I had a magic wand, it would be the influx of money to take the money equation out of the court system.
You addressed how, COVID has impacted the courts earlier. But of course, over the course of the past year, there's been some other major events, from the Black Lives Matter movement to the debate concerning the validity of the election. So what do you think the overall learning experience has been like for courts while navigating these controversial topics being in the public spotlight?
Well, I would hope that the court has, but I hope that that's a public perception too, that the courts have succeeded, and the courts have done well through this. And I think that the courts have had this enormous learning curve on adopting to virtual courts. But I think that the public probably has a better understanding of the judiciary and how important all three branches are. And that if there's any unrest or unease in the other branches, that as long as the third branch stands firm, that it holds steady. And I think our third branch of government has held steady this last year. And so with everything that's gone on, it's, we've been slow and steady. And even when there's been accusations of political, the court, I think, has proven that those accusations are not true. So I think, if anything, the lesson, that we've learned is, just stay steady.
There's been an ongoing push for the justice system to emphasize rehabilitation for people who commit crimes over punishment. Where do you think the future lies on that?
Yeah. So again, that's really the money issue, right? I've been involved with that heavily in the juvenile justice side for 14 years, and tried to refocus. We did a big push, and Governor Hutchinson actually shut down one of the juvenile institutions because, we were there was no point in removing juveniles who committed crimes and taking them away from their community to, be incarcerated. And then you put them back in their community and expect, the skills to take on. It was how juveniles are with peer pressure. You have to teach them those skills in in the current environment so they can, be there sort of dealing with the peer pressure while they're learning those skills. You can't sort of take them away from the environment and teach them and then bring them back. We've learned that for, decades. But it all costs money. I think our prison systems has been unsuccessful in rehabilitating. How do you take the money from the prison system to put it into community service rehabilitation? And the belief is you can't defund that. Instead, you have to influx money and start those community service rehabilitation. And then as that is successful, then the need for the prison money drops and you can close facilities. And that's sort of what they've started doing in juvenile justice in Arkansas, but it takes the money to do that. It takes leadership to say, we're going to have faith that that's going to work and put money in there. So it's kind of a money game, but I'm not a big believer that there's tons of rehabilitation going on in the prisons.
What do you think the biggest challenge in the near future is going to be for the court system?
Our biggest challenge is going to be when the jury trials, when we reopen them, the tremendous backlog. So if you think about defendants that have been waiting their trials, our Speedy Trial Act is normally a defendant has a right to trial within 12 months. There were defendants that were ready for their 12-month trial when March and COVID hit. So now they're coming around on 2 years without their speedy trial. Many others, of course, have now are in that pipeline. The backlog is tremendous in civil and criminal cases. And that is going to be a huge challenge in Arkansas for how we're going to handle that backlog. And so, like I said, that's a big part of what our Supreme Court, what we're doing is trying to come up with a good game plan for when we reopen.
What would you say are the most negative aspects of being a judge?
The political, the press side. You've taken on the role of being an elected official. So that means you get the positive, people tell you do a good job and people say you do a bad job. We get threats to our personal safety, our families having to deal with, sort of the negative publicity. Those are the hard parts about being a job. You choose to run for office, but it brings your whole family into running for office at the same time. And
then on the other hand, what's the most rewarding aspect?
The most rewarding is when you just see you make a difference. Sometimes it's that needle in a haystack, we say, and there's the one case that the most unlikely person wins. We had a individual in prison that hand wrote a letter to the Arkansas Supreme Court petitioning for relief and ended up getting relief. It was a long, year process, but we get, I think, 2,000 letters from inmates a year. And his letter was, made it through the sort of calling and got through. We appointed him counsel. He got an oral argument in front of our court, and we successfully ruled in his favor. And then those days are like, that's why I'm here. It's like 2,000 inmates wrote us a letter last year, and this inmate, his handwritten letter, and he won his case in front of the Arkansas Supreme Court. Those are pretty great days.
Are there any other ways that the court system can help people who are existing inmates?
So I think one of our biggest challenges is figuring out how to work with Department of Corrections and get them so they can electronically file. Right now, our state Department of Corrections doesn't let them file electronically. The pleadings in our court, they're having to do it by paper. And so that requires postage and copying. And so that is something that we're really working on and trying to figure out how to change that. And hopefully that the Department of Corrections will come on board with us and move that along. That it's kind of a critical step.
All right, you've answered a lot of tougher questions, so I'll move on to some lighter ones.
Oh, no, they're fine.
So earlier, before we started, we were talking about books and how you have a impressive home library. Would you like to brag about that for a moment?
Sure, I guess. We have I have a personal library. We have about 4,000 books in it that my husband and I have collected over, decades now. And about 7 years ago, we finally were able to build a home that could hold our books. And so, yeah, I'm definitely, that's why when the library asked me to participate in this, I was all about anything that helps libraries.
We appreciate that. What are the most essential resource books for you in your chambers?
So without a doubt, Black's Law Dictionary, that's the big legal dictionary. I'm constantly, believe it or not, looking things up because words matter and their definition matters in legal opinions. Reading the Law, it was a joint book by Brian Gardner and the late Justice Scalia. That's the most critical sort of book that we use and cite in our opinions about how to interpret laws. So those are really the two that we're constantly using.
Do you have any book recommendations for the public who are interested in the judicial system?
Oh, yeah. So the one that I tell about now it's an old book. So I don't know if you've ever read it. It's called Cry the Beloved Country. And so it's really old. It's from the 1940s, but it's written about Africa in the apartheid time. But given everything that's going on in the world and civil justice and reform and everything going on, if you take a time to go back and read that book, because it's amazing that something that was relevant in the 40s in Africa is relevant today in the United States. But it's a great, great book, Cry the Beloved Country.
So what's your favorite lawyer joke?
Oh, no, I don't like lawyer jokes. I don't know that I have one.
Your favorite judge or justice joke?
Yeah. No, do you have a good one for me?
No. That's why I was asking, so I can steal it.
Yeah. No, I think maybe people are nervous to tell me judge jokes or lawyer jokes.
So what's the most awkward moment that you've ever witnessed in court?
Oh, well, I had a lady threaten and pull a gun and say she was going to shoot me in the trial court and say she had a gun. And and the way it works, I'll tell you, in circuit court is our benches are bulletproof. And so you duck under the bench, and then you have this sort of panic alarm, and you push the panic button, and that calls the SWAT team, fire, everything like that. So you call them, and then you kind of crawl out the back door. And she was, intoxicated and, kind of inebriated. And so when she said, basically, I've got a gun, I'm going to shoot, and went kind of crazy. The interesting thing is I did all of that and said, I've called, panic, I've pushed it, and I crawl out. Later, we watched the video, and everybody else stood there and kept going. And my court reporter with their mask, she stood there and kept recording. And she's like, I've got to make the record. But everybody was fine. And security took her down, and some of my staff took her down, and everything was fine. But that is one of those moments that, I'll just always remember. And, we didn't have good security at the time in Faulkner County, but we've got great security now. So
it's a real dedication from your clerk. I thought you said the reality shows weren't realistic.
Yeah, you would think so, but yeah, there are days that it felt realistic and more realistic than it should be.
So what moment in your career would you say you're most proud of?
Boy, that's a great question. I don't know. That I'm most proud of. In my
Not your dog right now.
What?
I said not your dog right now.
I know, I'm sorry. She's crying. 1 second. So I'm sorry, she's gonna have to get down. So my proudest moment. Boy, I don't know. That's so hard to say. That I don't know. I mean, there's lots of moments that have felt really good. I think on the trial court, there were lots of times that, I gave someone a benefit of a doubt, and then, they proved that they were worthy of that. I remember a defendant that was going to, have to go back to, he'd violated probation and parole, and he was going to have to get resentenced to Department of Correction. And he asked if he could delay it by a week to be there for his child's birth. And it was one of those, calls that you have to make. And I was really uncertain, but for some reason, I thought I gave him the benefit, and thought he needed to be there. And so I delayed it by a week, and then sure as the world, he, showed back up, and, brought in pictures, so some of those moments that it's like, okay, and you never know which way it's going to go, that he's going to go out and commit a crime when you gave him that extra week. But it's sort of, those moments when you had faith in people, and, it ended up being justified. And hopefully that then they thought the justice system's fair and that I had a chance, or they heard me out at least.
How much flexibility do judges have in decisions like that?
They do on the trial bench. They do. I mean, sentencing, if it's within the range, then they have tremendous flexibility within that. So, and it's tough calls. Like I said, same thing, judges make bond decisions, and it's, public safety, versus, the person's innocent until proven guilty. Those are calls judges have to make, every single day.
Would you personally encourage judges to lean more into that flexibility? Would you like to see more of that?
No, I think it's not for me to tell them. Having been there, it is such, they have the law, and they just have to make the decision every time. It's a different decision, based on the defendant and the facts in front of them. And they're tough decisions every time,
Well, last question I have for you. What advice do you have for girls and women who want to get involved in the justice system?
So hopefully I just encourage them to do so. And I think that the main thing is you don't have to want to be a lawyer to get involved in the justice system. So, we need, social workers, we need teachers, we need everyone involved in the justice system to make a difference. And it's as easy as just showing up and watching court. Nowadays, you can contact the court and say, I want to join in Zoom and watch court. If you have a young girl at home, there are actually quite a few female judges on the trial bench in Arkansas. Is reach out and say, can I watch one of their court hearings and Zoom in on them, especially if the students are at home doing virtual school. But figure out a way to get involved and do that. And I encourage everybody to get involved in their community.
Great. Well, to the audience, if you're watching live or you're watching 2 weeks from now, thank you. And we want to have more programs like this on different law topics. So we want to host a variety of lawyers and judges like Justice Wood here in the future throughout the year. So if you have any suggestions on any kinds of law-related topics, we'd love to hear them. And well, thank you for that great presentation and interview, Justice Wood. So I'm going to give you the final words here. So feel free to share your final thoughts and let people know where they can find your podcast.
Yeah, so again, Paul and Garland County Library, thank you so much for inviting me and having me on, and it's my pleasure. And for everyone else, it's just, my honor and privilege to serve you as one of your justices, and hopefully that you're learn more about the court today. And yes, if you're interested, the podcast is at ladyjusticepod.com. or it's Lady Justice Women of the Court. You can find it on all the podcasting sites. And then our court website is www.arcourts.com. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Right back at you. And thank everyone for watching. Have a good night.
Thanks.